the landing area down around Bruinsburg and Fort Gibson area is what is today known as U.S. Highway 61, Vicksburg Fort Gibson Road that will cross over the Big Black River at Natchez, Ferry, and continue north into Vicksburg. But as you saw in the topography yesterday, the road that Vicksburg down to a series of ridges going down into the Big Black River Valley, then ridges coming back out of it. It affords the Confederates an opportunity for a defensive depth. One ridgeline after another, after another, after another fallback position all the way to Vicksburg. Now, if Grant were to cross the Big Black River and push north toward Vicksburg, take a look at the maps that you may have in your hands. You'll note that he would be moving his army into a very narrow triangle of lane. Mighty Mississippi on his left, Big Black River to his right, and running across his rear. It will clearly limit his mobility and his ability to utilize his artillery. Equally important, you recall that the lifeline of Vicksburg is the Southern Railroad of Mississippi that connects Vicksburg with Jackson and via Jackson points elsewhere in the Confederacy. Grant learns for the first time that Grierson's raid has been successful when he occupies Fort Gibson and reads Southern newspapers. Despite what the newspapers might say, the damage to the Southern Railroad of Mississippi was primarily superficial. Grierson does knock it out of commission for a couple of days, but within just a few days, that line is back up and running. As a result, the lifeline, communication lines, are open once again. If Grant were to move into that narrow triangle of land and march north on Vicksburg, he is bottled up there for any length of time whatsoever, that supply and communication lines remains open for Pemberton. And as we all know, in the early days of May of 1863, Confederate reinforcements are being sent to the area. As a result, if Grant is bottled up, that line is open. Additional reinforcements of troops, artillery, and supplies could reach John Pemberton, perhaps tipping the balance of the scales in his favor. As a result, Grant, who has a keen eye for geography, and of course his background is logistics. He was a quartermaster during the Mexican War. Grant sees that lifeline. He decides to march northeast, get astride that railroad, destroy that line of supply and communication, isolate his opponent in Vicksburg, which will give him a much greater chance of success. Now you recall back in the first Gulf War, that interview that General Colin Powell had conducted over in Kuwait, when a reporter asked him what his plan was. And he said, quite simply, we're going to cut him off and we're going to kill him. And that's exactly what U.S. Grant was going to do here in the early days of May of 1863. He was going to march northeast, interpose his army between Vicksburg and Jackson, get astride that railroad, cut his enemy off, and then kill him. Cut him off and kill him. So you can see that the strategies have not changed all that much since the days of the Civil War. So in the early days of May 1863, rather than march directly north on Vicksburg, Grant is going to turn his 3 Army Corps to the northeast. Now the Union Army of the Tennessee, under Grant's command at this point in time, consists of 3 Army Corps: the 13th Corps under John McClernand, the 15th Corps under William Sherman, and the 17th Corps under James McPherson. Recall from our discussions yesterday that John McClernand's Corps is the first to cross the Mississippi. It will be the 13th Corps by and large that almost independently wins the Battle of Fort Gibson. McPherson's Corps will cross, some on April 30th, the rest of his Corps on May 1st, not arriving in time to battle at Fort Gibson. And so these 2 Army Corps alone are on the east side of the Mississippi River. Before Grant is going to chance pushing deep into the interior of Mississippi, he must unite his army. He must unite his army, because even when united, Grant is still outnumbered in this region by Confederate forces. Fortunately for him, the Confederates are even more scattered than his army is. And so Grant will immediately tell Sherman, after his demonstration at Snyder's Bluff north of Vicksburg, to make haste. Make haste and join up with the army as quickly as possible. So in that first week of May, 15th Army Corps under Sherman's command is busy moving down that long road through Louisiana from Milliken's Bend and Young's Point down to Hard Times Landing, where his corps will be ferried across the Mississippi River on May 6th of 1863. then pushed inland to the area of Willow Springs, which we will not be able to see here today. And there he joins up with Grant on May the 7th. Grant's three Army Corps, now united, what is often referred to as the Blitzkrieg of the Vicksburg campaign, will now begin. We'll examine these three Corps commanders and their assignments during this campaign. I think they're very revealing of the association that Grant has between himself and his subordinates, and give you some idea of the experience and capabilities of these three men. The 13th Army Corps, under John McClernand. Recall McClernand is the only one of the three Corps commanders who is not a West Point graduate. He is a former Democratic member of Congress, a lawyer by training and profession. He has risen to the pinnacle of success in the halls of Congress in 1860 when he was narrowly defeated for the speakership of the U.S. House of Representatives. A very ambitious, egotistical man, he clearly has his eyes set on the White House. He realizes in his quest for the White House he can win greater laurels and headlines on the field of battle than he can in the halls of Congress, and so he resigns his seat in Congress and takes up a sword. Due to the fact he is very popular back home in Illinois, has a huge reputation throughout that region, he is successful in helping to raise large numbers of troops for the United States Army, and he will be rewarded by the commissioning as a brigadier general. He will fight with Grant at Belmont, again at Henry and Donelson, and at Shiloh, where he commands a division. At the outbreak of the Vicksburg campaign, he is Grant's most experienced subordinate officer. Now, you recall from our discussions over the past few days that it is John McClernand and John McClernand alone out of the three Corps commanders who supports this initiative being launched by Grant. And as General Hills tells him, you always assign the point to somebody who believes in the operation. So out of the three Corps commanders, as McClernand is the only one who believes in this venture, it will be John McClernand who will take the lead down the west side of the river. And I suggest to you, arguably, the most important assignment of this campaign. McClernand will have 4 divisions under his command. And so it is the 13th Corps that leads the Army's van down the west side. It is the 13th Army Corps that is the first to cross the mighty river and be landed on Mississippi soil. It is the 13th Corps which will single-handedly, for all intents and purposes, gain victory at Fort Gibson. During the inland phase of this campaign that we're about to study today, Grant will assign John McClernand the point of danger, point of contact out on the federal left flank. It will be the 13th Army Corps out on the federal left. Its left flank will be anchored on the Big Black River as they ascend in a northeasterly direction, this watershed between the Big Black River and Bayou Pierre. It is believed that the point of danger will be on the left, but you always want to have a very capable officer at the point of contact, and John McClernand will be given that key assignment. I think that speaks volumes of and by itself for what Grant thought of McClernand's fighting ability, his leadership ability, and his actions on the field of battle. The 15th Corps is led by General William T. Sherman, a man very much like Grant, native of Ohio, West Point graduate, class of 1837. Sherman, however, is not a veteran of the Mexican War. Throughout the course of the Mexican War, he is stationed in California, where he gets disgruntled with Army life. He will resign from the Army of the United States, and in between his resignation and the outbreak of the Civil War, he will bounce from job to job to job, very reminiscent of U.S. Grant, fail in most of those endeavors. But shortly before the outbreak of the Civil War, Sherman seems to find his true calling in life when he becomes president of a military academy in Pineville, Louisiana, what is today known as LSU. He likes it in Louisiana and has determined to settle his roots. But then comes the war. The governor of the state of Louisiana calls upon Sherman to furnish troops for the state's forces. Sherman refuses to do so and in turn tenders his resignation. He will return northward to Missouri, where his wife is from, and there he'll assume the job of the president of a railroad company, a streetcar company actually. When the war breaks out, the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, requests of Congress the authority to expand the Army of the United States. Many of you may know that at the outbreak of the Civil War, the Army of the United States numbered a whopping 16,000 officers and men. A whopping 16,000 officers and men. And most of these, of course, were out on the western frontier, guarding the westward migration, protecting those settlers from Indian attack.
Now, at the outbreak of the war, you recall, what does Lincoln request?
75,000 volunteers. We know, of course, in looking in hindsight, the naivety of all that. 75,000 men, yet the largest army ever fielded by the United States prior to the Civil War was during the Mexican War. 45,000 men under Winfield Scott. The largest number of troops General Washington ever had under his command, 17,000 men. So here President Lincoln calls for almost a doubling of the army from the Mexican War, 75,000 volunteers. By the end of the war, several million men, north and south, would be engaged in armed conflict. But anyway, the army is expanded. Several new regiments are authorized by the Congress. Through political lobbying, William T. Sherman will be made colonel of the 13th United States Infantry. His first action of the Civil War, for all intents and purposes, will be at the Battle of Shiloh, where he befriends Ulysses S. Grant. Recall on the first day of the Battle of Shiloh, Grant's forces are surprised. They are driven back all the way to the landing. Most of the army is despondent. They have lost confidence in Grant. But Sherman stands by him, and Grant very much appreciated this. If you won the friendship of Ulysses S. Grant, you had it for life. Regardless of what you did to the man afterwards, you had it for life. He was very loyal to his friends, and this would get him into trouble as president of the United States. But he, as a result, developed a very strong attachment to William T. Sherman, and he would become Grant's most trusted subordinate officer. In Grant's mind, the most important assignment of this campaign is going to be leaving Sherman behind at Milliken's Bend and Young's Point to make those demonstrations, to deceive the enemy into thinking that the entire Union Army is still opposite the Vicksburg batteries. Sherman does not do a very good job of this, but it works just the same. And so the 15th Corps is left behind. But once the army is reunited here on Mississippi soil, again, in Grant's mind, Sherman is his most trusted subordinate officer. He's going to give him the important swing position. And so McClernand will be out on the left. Sherman will be in the center in that swing position, where he can either swing to the left if need be to support McClernand, or swing way out to the right to support McPherson if need be. A very versatile position, very flexible. You want somebody you trust in that capacity as well. We finally come to the 17th Army Corps under Major General James McPherson. You recall that McPherson is Grant's youngest and most inexperienced subordinate officer. McPherson is a West Point grad, I believe it's class of 54, first in his class at West Point. He is not a veteran of the Mexican War. He is a lieutenant of engineers. He is assigned to Grant's staff, where Grant develops a strong personal liking for McPherson. After all, he is young, he is handsome, he is jovial. Everybody likes Jimmy McPherson. Anyway, Grant will take him from the staff position as a lieutenant of engineers, transfer him into a line capacity where you have greater chance for upward mobility, and in a 14-month period, McPherson will go from a first lieutenant of engineers to a major general in command of an Army Corps of 10,000 men. That's a pretty meteoric rise. Now, I notice there are a number of veterans in the bus here today. Did any of you have such a meteoric rise through the ranks? My point is that McPherson advances through these ranks so rapidly that he really doesn't acquire the skills necessary, I think, to warrant the command he now holds. And at the outbreak of this campaign, I think it comes back to Grant that maybe this guy's been promoted too fast. I need to shield him. I need to protect him. I need to watch out for him. And so throughout this campaign, I think you'll find, if you make a sober evaluation of it, that throughout this campaign, he is shielding Jim McPherson. And so it'll be McPherson who follows down the west side in the wake of John McClernand. It will be McPherson, once we're on this side of the river, who's way out there on the federal right bank, farthest removed from Vicksburg, hopefully out of harm's way. But a cruel fate would dictate that on May 12th of 1863, it will be the 17th Army Corps that runs into trouble at the Battle of Raymond. And that will be Jim McPherson's first battle as a Corps commander. So McPherson is way out on the right. So keep that alignment of the Army in mind, keep those assignments in mind, keep those relationships in mind, if you will, as we begin our evaluation of the inland campaign. We're heading in a southeasterly direction right now toward the Baldwin Ferry crossing of the Big Black River. Once we cross the Big now traveling. In fact, they were bivouacked along this creek on the night of May 11th, May 12th. If you take a look at the movements of the Army of the Tennessee during this inland phase of the campaign, you will see that their movements, the number of miles they march each day, the rate of their march, is dictated entirely by the availability of water. You recall there's too much water in Louisiana in April of 1863. Once they cross on the Mississippi side much higher, better drained, there is a paucity of water. If you recall, as Ed mentioned, there is no rain in this area from April 27th until May the 14th. So by this time, May the 12th, these roads are dusty and there's very little water to be had. So Sherman's Corps, McClernand's Corps, McPherson's Corps, they'll all move from water course to water course to water course to water course, not only for the benefit of the men, but for the animals as well. And so from that creek we just crossed on the morning of May the 12th, Sherman's 15th Army Corps, accompanied by Grant, will move out this road. As they approach 14 Mile Creek, they will come under fire of Confederate cavalry under the command of Fort Adams, and a skirmish will ensue. Sherman will deploy his lead brigade, drop trail with his lead battery, shell the bank of 14 Mile Creek, and after a sharp skirmish of a few hours, finally drive the cavalrymen away, cross over 14 Mile Creek, and secure the crossing at Dillon's Plantation. There, both Grant and Sherman will establish their headquarters on the night of May the 12th. As we cross under the Natchez Trace Parkway here, which is a unit of the National Park System, we'll soon be getting a turn to our left, and the bridge at 14 Mile Creek will come into view. So as the men of the 15th Army Corps round this bend, suddenly they will see the sunlight gleaming off of brightly polished muskets of the cavalrymen. 14 Mile bridge across 14 Mile Creek. So as this lead brigade deploys on either side of this road, feeling for the Confederate line, they'll realize that they are only up against a small cavalry force, push across the creek and drive the cavalrymen away. Grant and Sherman are pleased with the results of the day's activities, and so will bivouac in this area on the night of May the 12th. Grant has also heard the sound of firing at Whitaker's Ford off to our left rear, and even farther to our left rear at Montgomery's Bridge. But of the four actions that take place on the banks of 14 Mile Creek on May the 12th, the largest and most significant, of course, will be the Battle of Raymond, fought by Jim McPherson, out to your right front. And we are heading out toward Raymond Battlefield today. But we are going to make our first stop today here at Dillon Plantation, where Grant and Sherman establish their headquarters on the night of May the 12th. A fateful decision will be made here, and we'll tell you all about that decision in just a few moments when we make our first stop. You see the cluster of buildings off to our right front. That is the site of the Dillon Plantation House and all of its outbuildings. All of this property you see here off to your right and left is now property of the federal government and the National Park Service. And I'll tell you all about that when we stop, and I'll inform the entire group as a whole.
Off to the left. So.
Yeah, that's your
The Park Service, by the way, is in the process of tearing down all these modern structures. The Dillon Plantation House is just off to your right. The Dillon Family Cemetery is across the road here on your left back of these trees.
when he takes Fort Gibson is to entrench and send one corps to support General Banks, and they'll capture Fort Hudson first, and then a combined troops will move against Vicksburg. But Grant has the initiative. He knows it's going to take at least, and he guesses pretty much right, because of his experience with Banks, it will take about 2 weeks to get the word to Washington that he is not going to do what Banks he's ordered to. He is going to continue to press inland and not halt, fortify, and send a corps down to join General Banks in the capture of Port Hudson, which would have delayed it considerably and may have caused the campaign to fail. So, having made that decision, he is going to send General Logan's division down here, part of Logan's division, to keep the Confederates honest on the road that goes to Grand Gulf. He's going to send another brigade up to Ascamana Ford to see if they can get across there, and he is going to have Burbridge's men build a raft bridge across the river here at the little Bayou Pier, but they don't do a very good job at first. It tips over, so they have to rebuild it. But McPherson is soon advancing up this road. They're going to burn a tremendous Confederate commissary depot in this area, where you'll smell burning bacon and ham for miles. Over about 5,000 pounds of bacon is burned there. And the Union are going to arrive at Grindstone's Ford by the evening of the McPherson's advance, by the evening of the 2nd. Grant is moving fast. The Confederates will not do a good job of turning the suspension bridge. Baldwin's men are in too big a hurry, and the Union are able to save part of the roadway before it burns through. And by this time, Lloyd Tillman has arrived in this area here, north of Grindstone Ford, and that means there's going to be an engagement on the morning of the 3rd as McPherson's men cross the Bayou Pierre and drive the Confederates from Willow Springs. Grant is now going with his staff and Fred over to Grand Gulf to consult with Porter, take a bath, change his underwear, and send messages to Sherman, who has been demonstrating against Haynes Bluff, and tell him to start southward as fast as possible along the road pioneered on the west side of the river. During the afternoon, the Confederates have an opportunity because McClernand is still in the Grand Gulf, in the Port Gibson area, and they're going to divide their columns. They're going to send Marcellus M. Crocker going due north from Willow Springs. Logan is going to go toward Grand Gulf, then turn north, and they're both going to converge on Hankinson's. Now, the Confederates have the defenders, all the Confederates that fought at Fort Gibson. Although they had about 8,000, they could probably get about 5,000 available. They have the men that Lloyd Tillman brought down with him, and Carter L. Stevenson, this man that Bob greatly admires since he's from Fredericksburg. Stevenson will march down here with 4 brigades. So for a brief time, opportunity knocks for the Confederates because they have overwhelming numbers in that area. They can fall on Cockrell, they can fall on Crocker, defeat him, or fall on Logan, defeat him. If they have a great captains there, but Loring and Stevenson, I guess Bob would blame it on the Loring since he ranked Stevenson. They make a decision to not hold south of the Big Black. they will withdraw their men, both the men that had fought at Fort Gibson and are going to halt. You're going to have McPherson, and Sherman will be Grant will not be staying at McClernand's headquarters. McClernand has probably much prefers Dick Yates with him. I find probably Dick Yates would be a lot more congenial. So they're going to be in the Willows area. They're going to send Osterhaus forward as far through Rocky Springs to Big Sand Creek to set up. So you're going to have the 13th Corps in this area. You're going to have the 17th Corps here in this area. And on the 7th, Sherman's men begin crossing the Mississippi, crossing from Hard Times and landing at Grand Gulf and marching due east from Grand Gulf. By the throughout the 7th and into the early hours of the 8th, Sherman is crossing. Now Grant has an option. What is he going to do? Let's see how Terry and Parker address this in respect to modern military thought. And that code name that everybody likes, these code alphabetical names, Grant wouldn't know what he's talking about. But it's what they use. So Grant had his option. He holds a bridgehead across the Big Black. Pepper's men, as you can see, have dug in and are fortifying from Brendan across on a line through the Lost Bluffs to Baldwin's Ferry. And are entrenching. He can attack northward here. And he scouted it out. But he's attacking into the Confederate strength. His strength might prevail. But if it does, he will drive the Confederates back into Vicksburg, and he might capture Vicksburg. But he will not capture what's the most important, Pemberton's army. What is he going to do? He's going to move up the watershed between the Big Bayou Pierre and the Big Black River. That watershed has been the avenue of communication long before the white man saw here, because it's along a ridge line. And that's the way he is going to begin his advance, and he is going to move up what would, he's a now if you're a tourist driving the Natchez Trace, you're going to be a lot more accurate if you're following Grant's army, because the Parkway is parallel to the historic trace. It is a parkway and only has nodules that incorporate the trace. It was built originally as a work relief program and using the principles of the Barrett Market. All right, so they're going to move along the watershed. Now, as they move out, they're going to detach General McPherson. Because what Grant wants, now by doing this, if he goes northward and strikes the railroad, right now he's thinking of reaching the railroad between Edwards Station and Bolton. He is going to then pivot his army and advance on Vicksburg, pinning not only capturing Vicksburg, but pinning the Confederate army up into this area. But he's going to he wants to approach the railroad on a broad front. So he's going to send McPherson when they reached the area of Fisher's Ford. Now, if you came out of Vicksburg, we pointed out the Halls Ferry Road. So you got the Halls Ferry and Fisher's Ferry, and you've got two ferries that go in across the Big Black. So the Fisher's Ferry Road goes southward to Reaganton, and then it comes down here to Utica. So that is where they're going to send General McPherson, down here from the Reagan Down Road, and he's going to occupy Utica. That is putting him on the right. He's going to send Clark Wright. Where is Marshal Crowley? He looks like Clark Wright. He's a cavalryman, and he's going to dash in here and go into Crystal Springs and cut the railroad going south. That's even closer to Jackson than where Grierson had cut it in Hazelhurst. So we have McPherson up here, and on the 11th is an important day. McPherson is in Utica. He has sent Clark Wright, Clark Wright over here to Crystal Springs to bust up the railroad. And on this day, we have been traveling with the Army. Remember, we got on the road with the Army at Baldwin's Ferry Road. Now, at this time, McClernand has the lead. McPherson has left and is down at Utica. So on the 11th, McClernand's men halt along 5 Mile Creek. Remember, no rain since the 27th. So you've got to move your army from water source to water source. Remember, these equines need at least 9 gallons of water a day. That's a lot of water. All right. So the army, so McClernand's men halt on Commissioner Creek, and during the day, Sherman's men pass through them. Now again, Grant will be traveling with Sherman. He's at the sociability of McPherson's headquarters at Hankinson's. Now he's with Sherman. You notice who he doesn't travel with. If I was Dick Yates, I'd be pissed off. All right, so there's a lot of good-natured guying and catcalls back and forth, and Sherman's men passed through McClernand. So now, by the evening of the 11th, McPherson has moved out of Utica up to Roach's plantation. So there is McPherson on the evening of the 11th up at Roach's plantation. We say the 6th Missouri is on the raid over the Crystal. East on the Port Gibson Road or the Natchez Trace, not on the Parkway. I hate the Spencer Parkway. But that is what they do. Right about where we crossed the Parkway, you saw that large creek. That was 14 Mile Creek, and Sherman's vanguard is going to clash there with Ward Adams's cavalry. The Union are going to have to bring up the Flying Dutchman, Landgraber's battery, to break the Confederate roadblock. And by nightfall, they are going to halt on the nightfall. This is on the 12th. On the nightfall of the 12th, around here is where Sherman, his 2 divisions, are camped, and Sherman and Grant's headquarters are at the Dillon House. So that is where they are. They've had a skirmish that day. They know there's been a big battle going on to the east of them. They can hear the noise. But we're going to talk about the effect of that battle when we get on site on Grant. Now you're going to have the same thing. On the same day, what does McClernand do? McClernand is going to be moving to the east along the Natchez Strait, but Pemberton is reacting now. He knows the enemy army is now getting to the east of him. So he's going to tell General Bowen, I want you to take your division, leave Baldwin, cross the Big Black, and occupy Edwards. Meanwhile, the Confederate engineers are throwing up a strong defense line east of the Big Black, anchoring their left on the Big Black and their right on Gin Lake. McClernand is now moving northward toward Mount Moriah. We have a guy that loves the 29th Wisconsin for some reason. They're in Hovey's division. They have the lead. And as they approach 14 Mile Creek in this area here, they're going to engage the tough fighters of Elijah Gates. Elijah Gates is a tough son of a bitch. He's going to come out of Franklin with both arms shattered, steering his horse with his teeth, the reins in his teeth. He's one tough son of a bitch. And they're going to engage the 2nd Illinois Cavalry, and they can't really move them. So they're going to have to bring up infantry, and they're going to drive the Confederates across the 14 Mile Creek, and you have a bridgehead on the north side of 14 Mile Creek. Behind Hovey is lots of weight, Carr and Osterhaus. The other division, commanded by A.J. Smith, has moved northward on a road parallel and to the west of the road traversed by these three divisions and have occupied Montgomery's Bridge. So now, by the evening, except for McPherson, by the evening, and even McPherson, after a hard fight, is where Grant wants his men. On a front, extending from Montgomery's Bridge to Raymond. Now, if McPherson had brushed those Confederates aside, if he had not had a fight, if McPherson was a fighter, not an engineer, perhaps he would have not thought he was facing two brigades. He will, after a desperate fight, hold Raymond. Now, if there'd been no desperate fight of Raymond, on the 13th, Grant's army, along a 12-mile front, would have advanced and reached Baldwin and Edwards, and then pivoted 90 degrees. So that is the situation. The Confederates have advanced well into this position. There's been a clash here at Whitaker's Ford, south of Mount Moriah. There's been a big battle here. There's been a skirmishing here. And a strange thing, and before I turn it over to my friends here, Bruce Catton writes an article. It appears in Holiday magazine. Now, Bruce Catton writes this article at the time of the Civil War centennial. He's already published his trilogy. He's already won the Pulitzer Prize in '55 for Stillness and Appomattox. He is now publishing his centennial history. Now, the centennial history is rather interesting. The Civil War, by 62, 63, the interest in the Civil War is probably reaching, has fallen precipitously. The Civil War centennial is killing the Civil War. So he will write this article, and he has the 13th. This is the decisive day in the campaign. This is in counterfactual history. General Grant will be injured on the 13th. So injured that he cannot lead the army. And he's going to work his scenario with Grant incapacitated on the 13th. That would be the day after we're talking here. Without Grant, he's going to work as a counterfactual scenario, just like Newt Gingrich is doing now, but not as well known. Bruce O'Nally knows a lot more about history than Newt. Counterfactual history on the Battle of Gettysburg. And they're going to have the Confederates winning the Gettysburg campaign. And it's counterfactual history article that Captain does. Have you read that?
No, I have not.
It's in the Holiday magazine. You read it?
I just
Got it. All right, turn it over to my two colleagues. And I also want one of my colleagues to talk about how we got this property here. Well, no, how the American people got this property. And much to the dismay of Natchez Trace Parkway. Because I'm not that kind of Parkway. See, that's what the bad.
Raymond, at Jackson, at Champion Hill, and at Big Black River Bridge, enabling him to drive Pemberton's army back into Vicksburg. So keep that in mind, if you will. By Pemberton turning his back on the Mississippi and scattering his forces, he has turned the initiative over to a very dangerous opponent. And in the early days of May, as Pemberton is trying desperately to concentrate his available manpower, he will fall back toward Vicksburg, concentrate his troops on the west side of the Big Black River, and again yield the initiative to Grant, who will never relinquish it. To tell you a little bit about this property, you'll recall that Ed left off with the Battle of Raymond. The Battle of Raymond is an important battle in the Vicksburg campaign, and that the results of this battle will force Grant to alter the operational direction of his army. Parker's going to tell you about his initial objective once he crosses the Mississippi River. It is certainly not the capital city of Jackson, unlike you'll read in popular histories on the Vicksburg campaign. That is not Grant's objective. But after the Battle of Raymond and these other clashes along the banks of 14 Mile Creek on May the 12th, at this location, Dillon Plantation, on the night of the 12th, Grant and Sherman will establish their headquarters. Hearing the sound of firing off to my right at the village of Raymond, evidently a fairly sizable clash, Grant will ask McPherson to report on the day's activities. Now, this is McPherson's first test as a combat officer in command of the 17th Army Corps. As we'll find out, I don't think he handles himself very well in the morning, although he will recover and gain victory that day. He's somewhat embarrassed by the action, and so he simply tells Grant, I was attacked by lots of Rebs. Well, 3,000 Confederate soldiers are indeed lots of Rebs, but what McPherson failed to tell Grant was, but I outnumbered them more than 3 to 1. Based on this intelligence from McPherson, Grant will alter the directional course of his army, and rather than wheel toward the railroad, he will decide to march on Jackson, and that will bring on the Battle of Jackson 2 days later. So this is a key area in the Vicksburg campaign, a key piece of this puzzle. Now, this particular property belonged to the federal government, the United States Department of Agriculture. They leased it out for farming purposes. It was known as the Bailey Farm. But evidently, the Bailey family reneged on a lot of debt to the federal government. The government finally foreclosed on it. And the USDA, having such trouble with this property, decided to declare it surplus property and wanted to sell it. Fortunately for us, one of the employees in Washington, I can't think of her name right now, she saw the location of this farm and its proximity to the National Military Park at Vicksburg.
And so she called me out of the blue one day and asked if there was any significance to this property prior to the USDA selling it. And I told her, oh, yes, indeed. It certainly is a key piece of the Vicksburg puzzle. And I related to her the story of the skirmish at 14 Mile Creek between Sherman and Ward Adams Cavalry off to your right, the fact that Grant and Sherman established their headquarters here that evening and 2 divisions of Sherman's Corps bivouacked on the property, and of the decision to march on Jackson. Well, she thought that was relatively significant as well. And so over the course of the next several months, she and I brokered arrangements for the USDA to turn this property over to the USDI, the Department of the Interior. Now, although it is thematically associated with the Vicksburg operations, the Vicksburg National Military Park had no legislative authority to acquire this property. And so I called Wendell Simpson, who is the superintendent of the Natchez Trace Parkway, and Wendell, in examining his legislation, said we can accept it on behalf of the Department of the Interior. And so with the approval of Director Fran Manella, we acquired this property from the USDA. It is officially part of the Natchez Trace Parkway. The Vicksburg National Military Park has been charged to work with the Natchez Trace on interpretation of this site. Already a few structures have been removed. The rest of these structures that you see here will be removed. Directly across the highway we've been traveling is the Dillon Family Cemetery, which is a stop on the Natchez Trace Parkway. The parkway is in the trees behind you here. And so the land acquired by the Department of the Interior is a little over 400 acres. It extends on both sides of the Natchez Trace, by the way, because all the way from the bridge we crossed at 14 Mile Creek, follow the tree line off to your right rear, that is 14 Mile Creek, all the way around to this tree line, and then back over the Natchez Trace. So we have acquired 400 acres here, a very vital key piece of the Vicksburg campaign puzzle.
I watch on it to recall what
Well, Grant's intention then are to march directly north on the railroad, get astride that railroad between Bolton and Edwards, and destroy that railroad in detail. Once the railroad is destroyed in detail, thus cutting Pemberton's line of supply and communication, he will isolate Pemberton and Vicksburg, wheel his army, and destroy the Confederate army in detail. But events will transpire against Grant on the 12th, thanks to the Battle of Raymond.
Ferry, did you have a question?
I'm sorry.
No, you got it right here.
By May the 10th, John Pemberton has divined Grant's intention of getting astride the railroad. And so what he wants to do is move his forces into position along 14 Mile Creek to prevent that from happening. As a departmental commander, again, Pemberton is responsible not only for the defense of Vicksburg, but for Port Hudson as well. He will direct troops up from Port It is Gregg's instructions to find that force, hit it fast, hit it hard, and roll up the flank of the Union Army, drive it back toward the Big Black River, where Pemberton's main force will be in positions such as an anvil against which to destroy Grant's Union Army. It's a pretty good plan. Well, here on the morning of May the 12th, Gregg is now in position along the banks of 14 Mile Creek, which will be our next stop. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, earlier in the morning, he is notified that a Union force is coming out of Utica. The state troopers, however, cannot break through the Union cavalry screen. Now, anytime you have cavalry screening, of course, you always know there's infantry behind it. Sure enough, they can see a cloud of dust rising from the road, indicating the presence of infantry. It has not rained in more than 2 weeks. The roads are very, very dusty. With the shuffling of all those thousands of feet of McPherson's Army Corps, clouds of dust are rising into the sky that are visible for miles. And so these Confederate cavalrymen, these state troopers, inform Gregg that a Union cavalry force is coming out of Utica. The presence of the dust cloud behind them indicates the movement of infantry. In Gregg's immediate mind, this must be the flank force against which Pemberton has cautioned me. And so Gregg moves his troops into position along the banks of 14 Mile Creek with the intention of engaging this flank force, overwhelming it, and then start rolling up the Union flank like a wet blanket. Unfortunately for John Gregg, whose brigade numbers approximately 3,000 troops, rather than a small flanking force, the force coming out of Utica and marching down the road happens to be the entire 17th Army Corps of 10,000 soldiers under the command of James McPherson. Now, as you'll find out, here we are coming up the Fort Gibson Road. When we come to this stop sign, the village of Raymond is off to your left about 1.5 miles. The Utica Road is just off to our right, and that's where the battle will be fought. I'll save my discussion of the battle when we get on the battlefield, but let me give you a little bit of information here on the battlefield at Raymond. Again, Raymond is off to your left. That's the county seat of Hinds County. We're turning and going out to the battlefield. We will cross over 14 Mile Creek, where Gregg's men were in position, and move out to the Union deployment area. Off to your right rear, that brick building, is the site of the only Confederate battery present for the Battle of Raymond. It's a battery of 3 guns, including a Whitworth rifle. But the Whitworth rifle explodes on its second firing and will no longer be of service to the Confederacy. So their artillery will be cut by 33% very quickly. Here we are crossing 14 Mile Creek. This land immediately to your right is now owned by the Friends of Raymond, of which Parker is on the board of directors. They are putting in an interpretive trail in these fields on our right. Construction of that trail is supposed to start, I think, next month. Here we are now. It is the dominant geographic feature of the battlefield. It flows from your left to right. We're now ascending the high ground up which the Union troops will deploy. The land to our right here is being negotiated for by the Friends of Raymond. They are successful in getting that. It'll be fully 1/2 the battlefield, and that will be preserved.
What? Wipe your feet. You're gonna keep the mud out of the bus. Wipe them again when we go to Champion Hill. They'll get muddier up there. They've been captured at Fort Donelson, all except Bledsoe's battery. And they had been, the officers, senior officers, had been imprisoned in that pleasant abode in Boston Harbor, Fort Warren. The senior officers and the enlisted men had been scattered at various places. That nice place at Camp Douglas, Camp Martin, Alton, and others. They had been exchanged in September of 1862, and they had been sent. They had fought at the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou, and shortly after the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou, they had been sent down to Port Hudson. So they arrive here, and on the 11th, Gregg receives orders from General Pemberton in Vicksburg. You will take your brigade. It's a large brigade, including Bledsoe's 3 guns, and you will march down to Raymond. It is rumored that a Union brigade, normally 1,500 men, may be advancing on you from Utica. McPherson has 12,000 men and 22 cannon. He's also informed that Wirt Adams will be there when you arrive, and Wirt Adams will scout for you. There's a foul up in Pemberton's headquarters, and Adams's regiment has been sent to Edwards. So when Gregg arrives here on the afternoon of the 11th, Raymond in 1860 had a population of a little under 600 and has a spur railroad line going into Baldwin. He can find considerable concern, and the only Confederacy finds here is not Wirt Adams, but he finds some 60 Mississippi State troops commanded by Captain Hall. So Gregg is going to send Captain Hall. There's a wind getting it or something. It's the wind. Okay. Captain Hall is going down the Raymond Utica Road on the morning of the 12th to see if he wants to locate that Union brigade that is known to be at Utica. There are 6 Union brigades at Raymond, not 1 Union brigade at Raymond. So you can see the effectiveness of the Confederate intelligence service. As he goes down the road here, McPherson it's very dry. That may be excuse for the Union because their artillery will be rather ineffective this day. And as Hall goes down the road to Utica, he's going to encounter the advance of McPherson's column, trained by Captain Foster's company of Ohio Cavalry. And behind them are coming Logan's division. Let's hear a decent huzzah to warm you guys up today because of all those Illinois boys with Logan. Huzzah! Getting better now. All right. Then word will go back to General Gregg. The ladies are ecstatic. You're going to have, I understand, you're going to have the meal that they had planned to serve to the victorious Confederates when they come back. And since you guys look like you're from the 20th Ohio, you can get the meal first. So Gregg decides, since he's an We use words like this. That's where the 23rd, that open field is where the 23rd, 23rd Indiana will have its De La Rosa in there. So if you're good religious people, you know what's going to happen to them there. All right. He's then going to tell Colonel Beaumont, he's going to tell him to take your consolidated regiment and you go out the Gallatin Road. You're going out. And he's going to move them across the road we approached on. The historic road exists just to the left and downstream from where the current road is. And you're going to move forward and engage those enemies which are appearing on the high ground here. The Yankee advance has arrived here. We have Blackjack Logan here, and he talks to Captain Foster, and he calls up Elias Dennis. And he also is going to deploy 2 batteries. Because as they see these Yankees talking up here, they're going to see puffs of smoke over there as Bledsoe's 3 guns open fire. But soon the Yankees are going to have Captain DeGonier's 8th Michigan Battery. He doesn't know he hasn't got long to live. He had fought at the Battle of First Manassas. They're going to have the 2nd, the 3rd, Williams and his 3rd Ohio Battery, and eventually Rogers and D, 1st Illinois, with their 24-pounder howitzers, are going to be in position here. And he tells Dennis, I want you to advance your brigade, 78th Ohio on the right of the road, and the 30th Illinois on the left of the road. On the right of the road, we're going to have the 20th Ohio. We're going to have a good lunch like we are. Denied to those Confederates. And the 68th Ohio. And they're going to advance. Now this is the alignment. Here is your alignment in this area here of 14 Mile Creek. Now see, the Army forgot to put the creek on here.
It's on there. It's on there.
Oh, it's on
Real
there?
light blue.
Okay, so real light. I can't buy. I better get their glasses. All right, they're going to advance, and the 7th Texas is going to come forward, and the 7th Texas is going to take position. As you look at 14 Mile Creek, it has a very deep channel, very deep banks. And the 7th Texas is going to get into 14 Mile Creek, just above where the bridge is. The 23rd Indiana, down from Brown to Albany, is going to be too bold. And they're going to keep going. They're going into this wood line at the edge of 14 Mile Creek. And as I say, 14 Mile Creek is very deep. Not in water, but the channel and the banks. That means it's going to throw them into great disorder as they cross 14 Mile Creek. Downstream from them, you got the 7th Texas firing south and the 20th Ohio following north. And as they come out in that field, now let's get back to Beaumont. Beaumont is coming up this road here. He gets up on the high ground to the south and east of us, and he sees something he didn't expect. Greg, of course, is back in Raymond, up there in the cupola of the courthouse, which was the battlefield was visible at that time, and Beaumont sees something bad. He can see for at this time that there are lots of Yankees. He doesn't know, even Beaumont doesn't know that we've engaged 2 brigades of Yankees and 4 more are arriving on the scene. Now, up comes John Stevenson. So now Blackjack has his entire division on the field. And he's going to send John Stevenson is going over on the Union right. 32nd Ohio, 7th Missouri. Those are units from John Stevenson. Now the Confederates are now a new Union Brigade arrives. We're getting into the early afternoon. The Yankees now have 4 brigades on the field. No more Confederates have been engaged. Sanford's brigade, let's hear it. I want to have that Minnesotan show up all these Illinoisans. Because Sanford is from Minnesota, and he has with him the 4th Minnesota. We're going to say that's a crock that the 45th Illinois puts their crawlers over the courthouse first. All right, so Sanford is going to send 48th Indiana, and I didn't know the 8th Wisconsin was here. I thought the 8th Wisconsin, we're going to have to talk to those armies. What is that? Oh, again. He's going to send in the 4th Minnesota and the 48th Indiana, go to the right. The other 2 of his regiments go to the left. We just found out the 48th Indiana is in 2 places. So they're now. I didn't know it.
Just ignore the numbers, folks. Pay attention to the red.
All right. I'm looking up there for old name. All right. Now you have the 1st of Rockers. 2 regiments to the right, 2 regiments to the left. Now the Confederates, how are we going to get out of here? We're outnumbered. McPherson is finally beginning to realize maybe he has more men. Maybe he has so many men that he can't really handle them. Now we're going to look over in that direction. See the high ground between the house and a little bit to the right of the water tower. That is going to be it's been acquired by the Friends of Raymond. If we had lots of time, and if we had lots of time, we would go there. Mud and rain are no excuse to not go there. So that is where we have the 10th and the 30th Tennessee. The 10th and 30th Tennessee's up there. They've moved the 41st Tennessee down here, Colonel Farquharson, and the 7th Texas has moved over there. And McGavock decides, he realizes how many damn Yankees they are. How badly we are outnumbered. So he decides the way to keep those Yankees at least cautious, because they really have too many Yankees in the area for the amount of ground there. They're intermixed badly. So somebody, and I guess, where does the buck stop? I imagine General Hills, if he was here, would know if he was screwing up where the buck stops, but he might be able to blame it on to somebody else. And McGavock is going, as a good description of him, he wears a red lining, a scarlet lining on the inside of his cloak, throws it back, and it looks very crimson up there. It's a very dangerous way to be appearing all in red. He's going to be mortally wounded. His men are going to charge forward, though, and put the Union on the defensive. So, but now we're getting late in the afternoon. The Yankees now have engaged 4 brigades, and now another Union brigade is arriving. So the Union are going to eventually use 5 brigades, so there's 6 brigades, and now it's going to be root hog or die and get out of here for the Confederates. And the Confederates are going to disengage, and the Confederates are going to pull back. These men via the Gallatin Road, these people via the Raymond Utica Road, and when they get to Raymond, they're going to retreat to Mississippi Springs. That's going to be highway, I believe it's, what is it now, Highway 19? 18. Highway 18, and they'll go all the way back to Mississippi Springs, where they meet Confederate reinforcements, commanded by Shot Pouch Walker. Shot Pouch has brought his men a long way to get here. These men that have been ordered to Mississippi by the Confederate War Department and General Johnson are starting to arrive. Shot Pouch Walker has arrived in Jackson on the morning of the 12th, and he heads his men out for Raymond. But he's at Mississippi Springs, about 8 miles toward Raymond from Jackson, when Gregg arrives. The Yankees are going to go into town, the 20th Ohio 1st, and they're going, the good ladies of the, as we're going to find, Colonel Hill's wife represents the good ladies of the Western Hines County and Raymond, and they have set up on the courthouse yawn a large, that only country ladies can do, a wonderful thing that it used to be in rural America. A wonderful feed for the conquering heroes. But the conquering heroes will be traveling fast. But the 20th get there first, and they'll be like us when we get there. We will hopefully clean it all up. So those other Yankees, those Yankees from Illinois, won't get to eat any of that meal. So the Battle of Raymond is over. Gregg's going to report, McPherson is going to report a victory. Hard fight all day, and he's going to double Gregg's strength. He has fought 2 Confederate brigades. He has fought 2 Confederate batteries instead of half a battery. The Confederates have lost over 550 men. The Federals around 500. And the Battle of Raymond, which would be normally not a battle that would be of great significance, but as my 2 colleagues are going to point out, is a battle of national significance, probably considerably more national significance than a number of other battles in which many thousands of men are killed or wounded because of what is going to happen here. And I'll turn it over to them to what they want to do. So we've had the Battle of Raymond. The story, and also we're going to have a story of preservation, successful preservation efforts, and why I decided as I did last night. And I will only reserve one story of the metal detecting on this. I'll reserve that story myself because I'm involved in that.
The story of the picnic here at Raymond reminds me of that story of the Battle of Gettysburg, where Abner Doubleday, in command of the 1st Army Corps, writes in his book after the war that they fell back in good order from Seminary Ridge, and as they were entering the town in good order, the women of the town of Gettysburg gave them milk and cookies. Then if you read Beecham's book on the Battle of Gettysburg, he evidently had read Doubleday's memoirs, and he writes in his own, says, I don't know about General Doubleday, but I ran like hell. And by the time I got to Gettysburg, all the milk and cookies were gone. When Vicksburg National Military Park was established by the Congress in 1899, it was charged with commemorating the campaign, siege, and defense of Vicksburg. Yet Congress, in its infinite wisdom, only set aside the immediate area of the siege and defense lines. Over the years that I've been here at Vicksburg National Military Park, we've taken the charge of commemorating and interpreting this campaign quite seriously. And to do that, we've needed to establish a very large network of partners
First lieutenant to major general in 15 months. As I told y'all, I think I wore socks in Korea longer than that. So you understand. This is a young man, and McPherson needs some prodding. But Grant wants to prod him. He sends this message: move your command tonight to the next crossroads if there is water, and tomorrow with all activity into Raymond. That's a polite way of saying hurry up. At the latter place, you will use your utmost exertions to secure all the subsistence stores that may be there, as well as in the vicinity. Now listen to this next sentence. We must fight the enemy before our rations fail, and we are equally bound to make our rations last as long as possible. Did y'all hear that pronoun? Not you, we. Now he's telling him, hey kid, I'm in this with you. You know, we're together on this. This is good leadership. He says, upon one occasion, you made 2 days' rations last 7. What's that known as? A pat on the back. We may have to do the same thing again. So he's told the young man, hurry up. By the way, I know you can do it, kid, because you've done it before. This is good leadership. Now listen to this. He says, I look to you to impress the necessity of this upon your division and brigade commanders, and through them upon the troops. I want you to let every one of your general officers, who are going to tell the colonels, who are going to tell all the way down to the captains, and then all the way down to the privates, why we're doing this. That's known as unity of command. That everyone knows the goal and the mission. He's teaching this young officer. He's teaching him how to be a leader through his messages and correspondence. It's great leadership in a short message. On the converse side, let's hear what Pemberton sends out. He had mentioned to you that Ward Adams' cavalry was not where it was supposed to be. So General Gregg, not having any cavalry, attacks a corps, sets a trap for a corps. It's a beautiful trap for a brigade. It's catching the tiger by the tail if you're attacking a corps. Listen to the message. This is on the 10th of May from Vicksburg. General Ferry will send this to Colonel Ward Adams, the cavalry commander. And I want you to see if you understand this message, because I'm still working on understanding it myself. Proceed at once to Edwards Depot and take command of all the cavalry there and at Raymond for operation against the enemy. Report to me your arrival there. Where? Do y'all understand that? Yeah. Let me read that again. Proceed at once to Edwards Depot and take command of all the cavalry there and at Raymond for operation against the enemy. Report to me your arrival there. Your command will remain at Raymond. I've gone through this and I said, you know, it sounds to me like he wants Adams to go to Edwards. Adams read it the same way. Pemberton wanted him to go to Raymond. Now, Pemberton sends at the same time a message to General Gregg. Move your brigade promptly to Raymond, taking 3 days' rations and carrying only cooking utensils and ammunition, no baggage. Let no one get ahead of you or through your lines to the enemy or know of your movements. Now, Gregg put this in a situation. Gregg's men have left Port Hudson, Louisiana. They have marched over from Osaka, Mississippi. Pretty good hike. They were supposed to get on the train at Osaka and have a train ride to Jackson. Nice train ride. What problem? Ben Grierson has torn up the tracks, and McPherson's cavalry has torn up the tracks. So these guys get the pleasure of riding a couple of miles, getting off, marching through the torn up tracks, trying to get back on, and they end up marching most of the way to Jackson. They are worn out when they get to Jackson. And if we get a message here that doesn't acknowledge the fact that they're worn out, and tells them, hurry up, take 3 days' rations, and don't bring any tents or baggage, by the way. Don't let anybody get ahead of you. No concept of the situation these men are in. He says, use Ward Adams' cavalry at Raymond for advanced pickets. Now we know that Pemberton wanted Ward Adams to go to Raymond. I read it, he wanted him to go to Edwards. Ward Adams read it, he wanted to go to Edwards. So Adams takes his cavalry to Edwards. He's over that way about 6 miles. Now, I love this one. Later on the day, he sends another message to General Ward Adams, Colonel Ward Adams. General Gregg is ordered to Raymond. Direct your cavalry there to scout thoroughly and keep him informed. Well, Adams happens to have 6 cavalrymen in Raymond. The rest of his 200-some-odd men are in Edwards. So, listen to this verb. Direct your cavalry there. Direct. What does that mean? Direct your cavalry there to scout thoroughly and keep him informed. Well, Adams thinks, well, my mission is to have the 6 guys in Raymond scout and keep him informed and keep my rest of my cavalry at Edwards. Aha! Yeah, direct your cavalry there. Direct your cavalry. Adams reads it to direct your cavalry that's already there. And Pemberton really means take your cavalry there. Instead of saying take your force to Raymond, direct your cavalry there. So these 6 guys go rounding up a bunch of old men and boys on farm horses, and they ride down here. And they run into some professional 250 cavalry here. Guess who wins? And they race back. All they can do is they see the head of the Union column coming up the road. McPherson has his entire column on one axis of advance. He's very inexperienced. It's hot and dusty. The column is spread out. Guys have got bandanas over their faces so they won't suck up all the dust of the lead guys. All these guys see is the lead, and they say, they go back and they tell General Gregg, looks like 2,000 men to me. Gregg says, they ain't never met a scout yet that doesn't exaggerate. That's a brigade of 1,500 run attack. All of this is because of this incredibly poorly written messages here. The Battle of Raymond ends up being fought, and whereas a very aggressive commander is led to believe he's attacking a lone brigade. He will also, remember, will send a message to General Gregg from information from General Tillman of the enemy being in force opposite the Ferry Baldwin. It's very probable that the movement toward Jackson is in reality on the Big Black Bridge, in which case you must be prepared to attack them in the rear on the flank. What he's saying is the enemy is really moving to the bridge over there, and these guys coming up on the road here are just a covering force for the right flank of the Union Army. You need to be prepared to hit them and take them. All of these lead Gregg to attack. Now, in 1865, Sarah Dorsey, who wrote a book about her father-in-law, Henry Watkins Allen. Henry Watkins Allen, and we won't go into him, but she's not a really focused writer, and so she writes a bunch of letters. She's a lady of means. She sends letters to Pemberton and to Joe Johnston and asks them a bunch of pointed questions. And one of the questions that she asked Pemberton is questions about the Battle of Raymond. And she puts this in the appendix of this book. Pemberton writes back to her, I was in no way responsible for the defeat at Raymond. Y'all hear that? Yes. After the cavalry's not here because of his poorly written orders, General Gregg attacks based on his orders, but he was in no way responsible. So you see a major character flaw with John Clifford Pemberton. Failure to accept responsibility for his actions. There's a difference here. Now, after the Battle of Raymond, and Grant's going to be over at Dillon's now, about 6 miles down the road, to your left and my right. After the Battle of Raymond, Grant's going to get the reports from Pemberton, from McPherson, that he's fought 6,000 Confederates, 12 pieces of artillery. He's going to get a spy report that Joe Johnston's arriving in Jackson with troops. He's going to know that Pemberton's off to his left front waiting for him at Edwards, and he will make the conscious decision immediately to swing his army to Jackson. In so doing, he's going to turn his back on Pemberton at Edwards and go after Joe Johnson. Now think about this. You've got enemy to the left of you, enemy to the right of you. You were planning on going to the center. This is the time for a more cautious man to say, guess what? Sherman was right. I shouldn't be here. I think maybe the safe thing to do is to turn around